Welcome to Pearl Harbor National Memorial. I would like to thank you for joining us for the 80th commemoration of the attack of Pearl Harbor and the island of Oahu. My name is Ranger Stan. I'm here at Ford Island. In front of me is Foxtrot 7 and the USS Arizona Memorial. Today I'm going to share an incredible story of valor, respect, and sacrifice of an unsung hero, Joe George. Let's take a step back in time nearly 80 years ago and use your imagination. The harbor looked very different that morning. It was quiet, still. Nearly 200 ships will be moored here in the harbor behind me. On the morning of December 5th, 1941, the USS Arizona would return from sea. She would be moored at the two mooring quays located directly behind me. The USS Vestal would be moored next to her to perform some repairs, as the USS Arizona was scheduled to return to Bremerton, Washington to be retrofitted with radar and anti-aircraft guns. Joe George, Petty Officer, First Class, 26 years old, a sailor, also a heavyweight amateur boxer, a very stout, strong man. On Friday, December 5th, 1941, Joe George had an amateur boxing match. That evening, he would be victorious. He would knock out his opponent. He would head downtown to Waikiki to celebrate along with his friends. At the bars, the young men got carried away, had a few too many drinks, and got into a bar fight. The MPs were called. They responded. Joe George would be returned to the USS Vestal. The captain ensured Joe George could not leave the ship for the weekend with a potential court-martial. Joe George, on the morning of December 7th, 1941, was on the deck of the USS Vestal moored directly behind me, performing some work. In the distance, at 7:55, the first bombs began to rain down on Ford Island, 10,000 feet high above. Japanese high-altitude bombers would drop munitions on the USS Vestal and the USS Arizona. The first round would find its way to the deck of the USS Vestal. The second round would find its way to the fourth turret of the USS Arizona. The third round would find its way to the center of the USS Vestal. This resulted in a massive explosion that would catapult and launch captain along with crew out into the open waters of Pearl Harbor. The fourth round, the most deadly, would find its way to the forward deck of the USS Arizona. A 1,076-pound bomb would pierce 4 decks, penetrate and ignite nearly 1 million pounds of high explosives and aviation fuel. This resulted in a catastrophic explosion. The ship would be lifted out of the water, the bow would crack off the ship, a fireball would be sent up into the air nearly 1,000 feet. Instantly, 900 sailors and Marines would be vaporized. USS Vestal's executive officer issued a direct order to Joe George, to chop the lines free from the USS Vestal, which would free the ship and save the ship. Joe George dropped the axe. He disobeyed the order. In the distance, he picked up a heaving line, a weighted, small diameter rope, and proceeded towards the main tower of the USS Vestal. There, in the distance, 70 feet across, he witnessed flames, fire, intense heat, and also black smoke as a result of the fires burning. He also noticed 6 sailors trapped on the foremast, shouting for help, for assistance. Joe George held the rope, and in one shot threw the rope 70 feet across the flames. The sailors on the foremast were able to grab hold of the rope, and affix a larger diameter rope, approximately 1 inch in diameter, and tie it off on their railing. From there, the 6 sailors proceeded to crawl hand over hand across the fiery abyss. Below them, flames, heat, black smoke, reports of the paint blistering aboard the USS Vestal. The sailors would slowly work hand over hand across that rope and land safely at the USS Vestal. 6 sailors that day would be saved by Joe George. 6 would be placed on either hospital ships or taken to a local hospital. 2 survivors. Don Stratton would be burned over 70% of his body and spend nearly 1 year in the hospital. Lauren Bruning would be burned over 80% of his body. Many years passed. The deck logs from the captain indicated that Joe George was deserving of accommodation. Unfortunately, Captain Young was killed in the Battle of Guadalcanal, so those records were permanently lost. Years went by. Don Stratton wondered, who was that man? Who saved my life? Who saved the lives of the sailors with me that day? No one knew. And Joe George wasn't clear that he was the person who saved them at first. Don Stratton dug deeper. He spent 15 years researching and identifying. Finally, he was able to identify and locate Joe George's widower. Joe George had passed in 1996. Don Stratton believed Joe George was deserving of a medal, and he worked tirelessly to commend the sailor for his actions. He teamed up with other survivors, Lauren Bruning, as well as Ken Potts, and they planned a trip to Washington, D.C. in 2017, where they met with military officials at the Pentagon. They also met with a senator from Colorado, as well as a senator from Arizona. Their last stop of that visit would be 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, where they met with President Donald Trump, and they explained their desire to recognize the efforts of Joe George. He was well deserving of a medal. Some time passed. Don Stratton didn't lose sight. Again, he visited the senator in Colorado and urged that Joe George be recognized at the 76th commemoration. Here aboard the USS Arizona Memorial at the 76th commemoration of the attack of the island of Oahu and Pearl Harbor, Joe George would be recognized. He would receive the Bronze Star with V for Valor. I want to thank you for joining me today for my program, and thank you for joining us for the 80th commemoration of the attack of Pearl Harbor.